Ladies and gentlemen, all right, let's dive straight into it. Let me ask you something. Have you ever found yourself completely confused by a guy who clearly wants you, but instead of making his move, he stays silent? You know the signs, right? He's around, his eyes say everything, and you can feel the tension, but when it comes to taking the next step or even opening up, he just stays quiet. It's frustrating, isn't it? You might be wondering, what's going on? Why doesn't he just say something if he feels this way? Well, I'm about to break down the truth. And trust me, it's not as simple as you might think. What you see as silence could actually be his way of dealing with a whole bunch of emotions, fears, and even past experiences that are holding him back. If you want to understand why he's staying quiet and what might really be going on behind the scenes, stick around, because we're going deep into the truth behind his silence, and it might just change the way you look at things. Sometimes, when a guy stays silent, it's not because he doesn't want you or isn't interested. It's because he's battling his own insecurities, and that's one of the hardest things to deal with. It's like a quiet storm brewing inside him. He may want you, he may care about you deeply, but the weight of his own fears can be paralyzing. And trust me, that silence isn't always a reflection of how he feels about you. It's a reflection of how he feels about himself. Insecurities can take on many forms. For some guys, it could be a fear of rejection. They might imagine the worst case scenario, that if they put themselves out there, if they open up to you and make their feelings known, you might turn them down, and that rejection would be crushing. It's a scary thought for anyone, but for someone with deep insecurities, that fear can be overwhelming. So instead of risking it, instead of putting himself out there and facing potential emotional pain, he stays silent. The silence becomes a shield. It's a way to avoid rejection without having to deal with the hurt of it. But it's not always about rejection. Some men are insecure because they don't feel good enough for you. Maybe he feels that you're out of his league, that you're too beautiful, too accomplished, or too intelligent for him to keep up with. He might love you from a distance, but the thought of you finding someone better than him fills him with doubt. He compares himself to others and falls short in his own eyes. In his mind, he might think, what do I have to offer her? Am I enough? And these questions can silence him, making him hesitate to even try. He doesn't want to feel like a failure, and putting himself in a vulnerable position could make him feel that way. So he stays silent, not because he doesn't care, but because he's unsure of how to be good enough for you. There's also the issue of being vulnerable. Vulnerability is tough for a lot of people, especially if they've had their trust broken before. If he's been hurt in the past, whether from a previous relationship, family issues, or just life in general, he might be terrified of opening up to someone again. He wants to let you in, he wants to be close to you, but the thought of exposing himself emotionally brings back all the memories of hurt and disappointment. His insecurities may stem from past wounds, and even though he wants to be with you, he's scared that you might do the same thing to him that others have done. So he retreats into silence, hoping it will protect him from getting hurt again. And then there's the pressure of not knowing how to handle feelings. Not all guys are equipped to navigate complex emotions. They might feel everything you want them to feel, but when it comes to expressing those feelings, it's like they hit a brick wall. They might not know the right words, the right actions, or the right way to show you they care. This lack of emotional vocabulary can stem from a variety of reasons. Maybe he was never taught how to communicate his emotions, or maybe he's just never had to. So instead of fumbling through the mess of his feelings, he keeps quiet. In his mind, it's easier to say nothing than risk saying the wrong thing. What's important to remember is that his silence doesn't mean he doesn't want you. In fact, the opposite might be true. He might be so consumed with his own internal battles, so wrapped up in his insecurities, that it's making it hard for him to reach out. It's hard to open up and be vulnerable when you're unsure of yourself, when you're questioning whether you're enough. But that doesn't mean he doesn't care about you. His feelings for you might be stronger than you realize, but he's trapped in a web of self-doubt, and that's keeping him from acting on those feelings. If you're ever in a situation where you sense this kind of silence, it's important to have patience. Recognize that his insecurity isn't about you, but rather about his own internal struggles. And while it might be frustrating to be left in the dark, understanding that he's fighting a battle inside himself can help you respond with empathy, not anger. Encourage him to open up, but also give him the space he needs to work through his insecurities in his own time. Silence, in this case, is not a sign of disinterest. It's the quiet hum of a man who is trying to figure himself out before he can be fully present with you. When someone is silent, especially when you know they care about you, it's often because they don't know how to express their feelings. For some men, expressing emotions is a skill they never really learned or practiced, and that can leave them paralyzed when it comes to opening up. There is a misconception that silence always means indifference, but for many, it's not a matter of not caring. It's simply that they have no idea how to communicate the deep emotions they're feeling. Think about it. Not everyone is naturally comfortable with expressing how they feel. Some people struggle to put their emotions into words, especially when those feelings are intense. When someone is in love or feels strongly about you, those feelings can become overwhelming. They might want to tell you how they feel, but the words just don't come out the way they want. Instead of making a mistake or sounding foolish, they keep quiet. This could come from a lack of confidence in their ability to express themselves, or fear that their words might not be enough to convey the depth of what they truly feel. Moreover, some men simply don't have the emotional vocabulary to express themselves in a way that makes sense. It's not that they're intentionally holding back. It's just that they've never had the opportunity to practice or understand how to articulate their emotions. In many cases, especially for men who were raised in environments where emotions were either discouraged or simply not discussed, the ability to communicate feelings is a learned skill. It doesn't come naturally to everyone. And for those who haven't developed it, expressing emotions, especially love, affection, or vulnerability, can be a daunting task. This inability to express feelings can be deeply frustrating for both sides. On one hand, you might feel that he's keeping his distance, that he's pulling away, when in fact he's simply overwhelmed by his own internal turmoil. He might want to tell you he loves you, that he cares, or that he's thinking about you, but the words elude him. So instead of risking sounding inauthentic or messing it all up, he stays quiet. Silence becomes his defense mechanism against the potential failure of his own emotions not measuring up to what he wants to say. The fear of not being able to express feelings right way also stems from the worry that his emotional expression won't be received the way he hopes. He might think that if he opens up and tells you what's on his mind, it could make things awkward or even lead to rejection. This fear of rejection doesn't always come from you. It might be based on past experiences or a general lack of self-assurance. So, when he remains silent, it's not because he doesn't feel strongly, it's because he's unsure of how to make sure you understand the depth of his emotions. In addition to this, there is the issue of vulnerability. For many people, vulnerability is terrifying, especially when they're unsure of how it will be received. To open up emotionally is to expose oneself to potential judgment, criticism, or even rejection. If a man is feeling unsure about how he'll be viewed or whether his feelings will be reciprocated, The silence can serve as a protective shield. It's easier to stay silent than to risk exposing his inner self and potentially getting hurt. And while it may seem like he's withholding from you, the truth is that he's holding back because he's uncertain and fears the emotional consequences. For others, silence also stems from the belief that actions speak louder than words. He may feel that his actions already show how he feels, and there's no need to vocalize it. Some men, particularly those who value actions over words, might not even realize that expressing their emotions verbally is just as important. They might think that if they're showing you love and affection in other ways, like through gestures, support, or physical presence, then that should be enough. They might believe that their actions are speaking for them, but what they don't realize is that words have a power all their own. The silence isn't about lack of interest. It's just that they might think they've already said everything they need to with their actions. What this all boils down to is that silence can sometimes be more complicated than just not knowing what to say. It can come from a place of fear, self-doubt, or an inability to find the right words. And while this silence can be frustrating for those on the receiving end, understanding that it's often not a reflection of his feelings for you, but rather a product of his internal struggles, can help you approach the situation with more empathy and patience. He's not staying silent because he doesn't care. He's staying silent because he's unsure, overwhelmed, and maybe even afraid to let those feelings out into the open. It's important to give him the space to figure it out and encourage him to find the words without putting pressure on him to do so immediately. When a man is silent, it's important to recognize that silence isn't always a sign of disinterest. For many, it can actually come from a place of emotional overload. Sometimes the feelings they have are so deep, so intense, that they don't know how to handle them, let alone express them to you. In fact, some men are more comfortable keeping things inside because they fear that expressing their emotions might make them seem weak or vulnerable. But the reality is that staying silent is not necessarily a reflection of what he feels about you. It's more about the battle going on within himself. One of the biggest reasons a man might stay silent is because he's struggling with his own emotions. He may feel confused or overwhelmed by how he feels about you, unsure of whether his emotions are appropriate or how to share them without coming off as too much or too little. For some men, the idea of expressing their emotions, especially love, is a foreign concept. They may have been raised in an environment where showing vulnerability wasn't encouraged, and that creates a kind of emotional barrier. It's not that he doesn't want you, it's that he doesn't know how to make himself emotionally available in a way that feels comfortable or safe for him. This emotional struggle often goes unnoticed because the silence doesn't necessarily seem like a big deal. But inside, the silence can be deafening. It's like he's holding on to this swirling mix of emotions, but doesn't know how to let it out without feeling exposed. For men who have experienced past heartbreak, betrayal, or pain, the fear of opening up again can make silence seem like the only safe option. They may have been hurt before when they shared their feelings or were vulnerable, so now, even if they want to open up to you, they hold back. The idea of being rejected or getting hurt again becomes a powerful force that keeps them silent, even if they truly care about you. On top of that, the silence might be caused by a fear of not measuring up to your expectations. There are so many societal pressures that can weigh heavily on a man's mind. He may feel that in order to win your affection, he needs to be perfect, to have it all together. Emotionally, financially, physically. If he doesn't feel like he's meeting those standards, the fear of you not seeing him as good enough can keep him from speaking up. Instead of voicing his desire to be with you, to love you, or to express how much you mean to him, he might hold all of it in because he's not sure if he's good enough or worthy of your time. For some men, silence becomes a way of coping with their own insecurities. If they feel like they're not measuring up in the relationship, they may retreat into themselves as a defense mechanism. They're afraid that if they share how they feel, you might see their flaws and weaknesses more clearly. It's like they're putting up a wall between you and them, thinking that if they stay silent, they can avoid exposing those vulnerabilities. This often leads to a sense of distance in the relationship, where one partner feels like they're being left in the dark, while the other is silently carrying the weight of their own fears and insecurities. The thing about silence is that it's not always about you. It's not always a reflection of how he feels about you. It's more about what he's dealing with internally. The emotions, the thoughts, and the fears he's carrying around may be too much for him to process or put into words. He might want to be open. He might want to express his love, but he's paralyzed by the fear of vulnerability, rejection, or failure. Instead of sharing that with you, he chooses silence not because he doesn't care, but because he's struggling with how to articulate something that feels too big or too complicated. So, when a man goes quiet, it's important not to assume the worst. Silence doesn't always mean disinterest or a lack of care. It often means he's dealing with his own emotional battles and fears. It's about recognizing that his silence is a sign of his own inner turmoil and emotional conflict. Understanding this can help you navigate the relationship with more patience and empathy. Instead of pushing for answers or demanding that he speak up, try to create a safe space for him to feel comfortable opening up at his own pace. That silence might be loud to you, but it's often a reflection of a heart that is afraid, uncertain, or struggling to find the words. And with the right support, he may eventually find the courage to break that silence and share what he's really feeling. When a man is silent, it can sometimes be a reflection of his need for space. This need for space doesn't always mean he doesn't care or that he's losing interest. On the contrary, it might actually indicate how much he values the relationship and is trying to protect it in a way he knows best. For many men, they believe that the best way to deal with overwhelming emotions or complex situations is to take a step back and process things on their own. While this might seem frustrating or confusing to you, especially when all you want is to know how he feels, it's important to understand that this is his way of trying to make sense of his feelings. Space for a man can be crucial because it provides him with the time and mental clarity he needs to reflect on his emotions. Relationships can bring about a lot of internal conflict, and sometimes the best way for a man to understand what he truly wants is by being alone. Without any outside influences, he might not want to drag you into the emotional turmoil he's experiencing. He doesn't want to speak in haste or make decisions based on emotions he's not ready to confront. For some men, time alone helps them process those feelings at a deeper level so they don't say or do anything they'll regret later. In essence, he's giving himself time to reflect and ensure that whatever he does next in the relationship is well thought out, healthy, and sincere. When a man pulls away, it's often because he's trying to avoid making rash decisions. Men are not always comfortable discussing their emotions in real time, especially when they feel conflicted or uncertain. Silence can serve as a self-preserving mechanism. When life is throwing too many emotional challenges his way, or he's not sure where he stands in the relationship, he retreats. This gives him time to prioritize his mental health and his own emotional well-being before he can be fully present for you. Additionally, many men are not accustomed to sharing their vulnerabilities with others, especially not in relationships. Society often teaches men to keep their struggles to themselves, to not appear weak or overly emotional. This can create a situation where, Even though they feel deeply, they struggle to express those emotions out loud. So they stay quiet not because they don't care, but because they don't know how to open up in a way that feels comfortable for them. They might even be afraid of being judged for their feelings, which prevents them from speaking out. It's not that he doesn't trust you, but rather that he is still learning how to express himself in ways that are open and vulnerable. In relationships, a man's silence can also stem from a fear of creating conflict. If he's unsure about something or worried that his feelings might hurt you, he may opt to remain silent to avoid unnecessary drama. He may fear that what he has to say could be misinterpreted or that it could lead to an argument. Rather than expressing his emotions and risking a conflict, he stays quiet, believing it might be easier to deal with the problem internally. Unfortunately, this silence can make it seem like he's withdrawing or losing interest, when in reality, he's just trying to protect the peace. He values the relationship so much that he doesn't want to upset things by speaking before he fully understands what's going on. What's also important to note is that some men may struggle to articulate what they feel in the first place. Men, in general, are not always taught to openly express emotions, and this lack of emotional language can make it harder for them to share what's on their mind. This can be especially true when it comes to discussing matters of the heart, where vulnerability is key. Men who are unfamiliar with discussing their feelings may find it easier to stay silent than to risk saying the wrong thing. Silence, in this case, becomes the most straightforward option for him to avoid feeling like he's failing to meet expectations. It may take a considerable amount of time and reassurance for him to feel comfortable enough to express himself honestly. Silence can also be a tool for a man to avoid feeling controlled or pressured. If he feels like you're pushing him to open up or demanding answers too quickly, it might cause him to shut down even more. The more you press him for answers, the more he might retreat into silence, feeling like he has no room to figure things out on his own. Sometimes, silence is a defensive response to the perceived pressure he's feeling, not a reflection of his feelings for you. If a man values his relationship, his silence is not an indication that he doesn't want you. Rather, it's an opportunity for him to work through his own issues, so that he can come back to the relationship with clarity and emotional availability. This kind of space allows him to grow as an individual and process his feelings. So when he's ready to speak, he can communicate in a way that strengthens the relationship rather than harming it. Patience, understanding, and respect for his need for space can lead to a deeper and more honest connection. By offering him the time he needs, you're showing him that you care enough to let him grow and heal at his own pace, which ultimately builds trust and emotional intimacy in the relationship. When a man is silent, especially in situations where you expect him to speak or act, it can be easy to assume that he's no longer interested. However, this silence is often not a sign of disinterest, but instead a reflection of his internal processing. Men and women sometimes communicate and deal with emotions very differently, and for many men, silence is how they navigate the complexities of their feelings. While it may appear that he is pulling away, in truth, he might be doing the opposite, pulling inward to understand what's going on inside his own heart and mind. This period of silence is his way of sorting through his emotions without making hasty decisions that could potentially harm the relationship. It's essential to recognize that silence doesn't always mean distance. In many cases, it's a form of protection for both himself and the relationship. The silence may stem from his desire to avoid conflict or saying the wrong thing. Men are often taught to be strong, decisive, and to avoid vulnerability. As a result, when they are unsure about something, particularly in a relationship, they can become silent because they don't know how to express their feelings, without feeling vulnerable or exposing weakness. They may fear that if they speak too soon or too rashly, it will create a misunderstanding or unnecessary conflict, which could cause harm to the relationship. Rather than risk saying the wrong thing in the heat of the moment, he may choose to stay quiet until he has a clearer understanding of his emotions and is ready to express them in a way that makes sense. Silence can also be a tool for him to protect the relationship from unnecessary drama. If he's not ready to discuss something or feels overwhelmed by the situation, he might believe that remaining silent is the best way to prevent things from escalating. This doesn't mean he doesn't care. On the contrary, it suggests that he values the relationship enough to want to deal with his feelings in a manner that is thoughtful and considerate of both parties. Sometimes when emotions are running high, words can be said in anger or frustration that can't be easily undone. So when he pulls back and remains silent, he may be trying to avoid saying something that he'll regret later. There's also the possibility that a man's silence reflects his struggle with his own internal conflicts. Relationships can sometimes bring up complex emotions that he may not be equipped to handle or express. He could be wrestling with feelings of uncertainty, fear, or even self-doubt, and during these moments, silence allows him the time and space to process those emotions. He might feel unsure about the future of the relationship, or he could be dealing with issues from his past that make it difficult for him to open up. Rather than sharing these feelings before he fully understands them, he chooses silence as a way to protect himself and, in some cases, to protect you from the emotional turmoil he might be experiencing. It's also important to consider the role of pride and ego in a man's silence. Many men have been conditioned to believe that they must always be in control, that showing emotion is a sign of weakness. When they are in love or invested in a relationship, they can become afraid of being vulnerable because it means they risk losing control of their emotions. In these situations, silence can serve as a defense mechanism to prevent emotional exposure. If he is feeling insecure or unsure of how to navigate the relationship, his pride might keep him from admitting it openly. This internal struggle between his desire for connection and his fear of vulnerability can often lead to silence as he tries to protect his sense of self. In some cases, a man might be silent because he doesn't want to burden you with his problems. While this can be frustrating, it's often a reflection of his desire to protect you from his internal struggles. He may feel that by remaining silent, he is sparing you from unnecessary stress or worry. He might assume that by keeping things to himself, he is being considerate, not wanting to overwhelm you with the complexities of what he is dealing with. This type of silence comes from a place of care, but it can inadvertently cause distance if not handled properly. It's also possible that a man's silence reflects a lack of confidence in how to approach the situation. Not all men are skilled in emotional expression, and sometimes they don't have the right words to convey what they are feeling. When faced with emotional complexity or uncertainty, the silence can be a sign that he's unsure of what to say or how to communicate what he's going through. Rather than saying something that might come out wrong or not fully encapsulate his feelings, he might prefer to say nothing at all until he's more certain of how to express himself in a way that truly reflects his emotions. What's crucial to understand is that his silence is often not a reflection of his feelings for you, but rather a reflection of his own emotional process. Men handle emotions differently, and sometimes they need time to work through their thoughts and feelings before they are ready to communicate. As frustrating as this may be, it's important to give him the space to process his emotions at his own pace. The key is patience, understanding, and allowing him the opportunity to open up when he's ready. By providing him with that time and space, you allow the relationship to mature and deepen, giving both of you the chance to grow individually and as a couple. When he finally does speak, he'll likely do so with more clarity, and the conversation will be more meaningful and constructive than if he had spoken in haste. When a man is silent, it's often easy to misinterpret it as a lack of interest or affection. But in reality, silence can be one of the most complex forms of communication in a relationship. His silence doesn't necessarily mean he's uninterested or that he doesn't want you. Instead, it may reflect deeper emotional struggles or complexities that he's navigating within himself. Sometimes he simply doesn't know how to express what he's feeling, or he's caught up in his own internal world, processing emotions that he might not fully understand himself. Understanding this dynamic is essential because silence is not always a reflection of distance, but a sign of internal work that he needs to do before opening up. For many men, silence is a way of protecting both themselves and the relationship. If he feels overwhelmed by emotions or the weight of a situation, his instinct may be to retreat inward and process his thoughts before making any decisions. This is not a sign of disinterest. Rather, it's a form of emotional preservation. By being silent, he gives himself the space to figure out what he really wants or needs, without rushing into a conversation that could lead to conflict or misunderstandings. It's often his way of ensuring that when he does speak, his words are measured and thoughtful, rather than reactive or rash. This silence could also stem from a deep-seated fear of vulnerability. Many men have been socialized to believe that expressing vulnerability is a weakness. They're taught to suppress their emotions and to appear strong, no matter what they're going through. When faced with the prospect of opening up about their feelings, they may choose silence instead because it feels safer than exposing the depths of their emotions. For him, silence can be a shield against the fear of being judged or rejected. It's his way of maintaining control in a situation where he feels emotionally exposed. Another layer to this silence is the fear of rejection or loss. If he's deeply invested in you and values the relationship, he may be afraid that if he speaks too soon or expresses his feelings in the wrong way, he could risk losing you. This fear of rejection can make him hesitant to say anything at all. He may fear that if he opens up too much, too soon, it could push you away or make you view him differently. In his mind, silence might seem like the safest option, giving him more time to gather his thoughts and ensure that when he does open up, it's in a way that doesn't jeopardize the relationship. At times, silence is also about control. When things feel uncertain or out of his hands, a man might pull back into silence because it's the one thing he can control. The unpredictability of emotions in a relationship, particularly when things are uncertain, can make him feel powerless. His silence is a way of taking back some control over the situation, even if that control is only over his own actions. In this space, he can decide when and how to engage emotionally without feeling pressured to react in a way that doesn't feel authentic to him. His silence might also be a way of dealing with the overwhelming complexity of his own feelings. Men often struggle with articulating their emotions, especially when they're faced with a range of conflicting feelings. Whether it's confusion, frustration, or a deep sense of love, trying to navigate these emotions can be paralyzing. Instead of expressing something that doesn't feel fully formed or clear, he may remain silent, waiting for the right moment when he can communicate his feelings in a way that makes sense. His silence, in this case, is a form of emotional self-regulation, allowing him the time to make sense of what he's feeling before sharing it. Moreover, silence can sometimes serve as a way of processing past experiences that may be affecting his current feelings. If he's been hurt in the past or has unresolved emotional baggage, he might pull away into silence to avoid repeating the mistakes or emotional pain he's faced before. This kind of silence is about self-protection. ensuring that he doesn't rush into something he's not fully prepared for, or that could potentially lead to emotional harm. While this may come across as distant or cold, it's often a sign that he's trying to take care of his own emotional well-being before diving into the complexities of a relationship. It's important to understand that silence, in many cases, is not a negative thing. Rather than seeing it as a sign of rejection or loss of interest, try to view it as an opportunity for growth for both him and the relationship. Silence allows space for both partners to reflect, process, and gather the emotional strength needed to communicate openly and honestly. When he is ready to speak, his words will likely be more thoughtful and intentional, coming from a place of clarity and understanding. So, when faced with silence, it's essential to resist jumping to conclusions. Instead, be patient, understanding, and give him the time he needs to process his emotions. When the time is right, he will open up, and the conversation will be richer and more meaningful because it comes from a place of introspection and emotional readiness.